Over 3 years after its original announcement, and a year after its last full trailer, the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild finally made another appearance in the latest Nintendo Direct. The last we heard anything of this game was back in March earlier this year, delaying the release window to spring 2023, and featuring a single new clip of Link with the ruined Master Sword. But now, with this brand new trailer, we finally got another lengthy look at the game. Well, if you consider a 1.5-minute trailer to be lengthy. This time, it wasn't just new gameplay clips we got to see. After 3 years, we finally know the name of this new Zelda title, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and it's releasing on May 12th, 2023. Of course, in a trailer big enough to finally reveal the title and release date, there's clearly a lot to go over. So, you know what that means. It's time we power up the old analysis machine with some Sheikah technology to see what secrets and hidden details we can find. We may even call back to our earlier analyses of this game as well. So welcome, everyone, to the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom analysis. Rather than breaking down the trailer frame by frame in order, let's start with the title and logo themselves. During an interview with IGN back at E3 2021, Bill Trinen said that the subtitles for the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild start to give little bits of hints about what's going to happen in the game. In other words, they would relate to an important part of the game itself, like Ocarina of Time or The Wind Waker being key items in their games, or Majora's Mask or Twilight Princess being integral entities to the story. Well, what could Tears of the Kingdom mean to the greater story here in this Breath of the Wild sequel? Could we have a possible answer to this question by the end of this analysis? I hope so. So, let's start by looking at the Master Sword. Like the Breath of the Wild logo, it strikes through the Z in Zelda. But rather than being completely rusted along the middle of the blade, it takes on a different look this time, distorted and damaged along the middle of the Z, matching up with what we saw back in March. A mangled, rotted-looking weapon. Poor Fi, she has not been doing well in these games lately. The lower half of the blade is missing, replaced by a dark blade traced with green energy. There's clearly something big happening here with the Master Sword. This lower half of the blade doesn't even look like the Master Sword. It has ridges and bumps, and parts that look like they would snag when swinging at an opponent. It vaguely reminds me of the Razor Sword from Majora's Mask, looking, well, unconventional. So, what happened to the Master Sword? Well, we've already discussed in previous analyses that it must have been damaged when Link was attacked by Malice, and part of his quest appears to be reforging the Blade of Evil's Bane. Of course, fixing or forging the Master Sword isn't unheard of, as that's happened in several different Zelda titles. But the lower half is where this gets tricky. Surely this isn't part of a design upgrade to the Master Sword once it gets repaired? The sword has gone through several different upgrades and iterations across the series, sure, but most of those kept the main design intact. So if this lower half isn't part of the Master Sword, it means there's some other blade of importance in play here. One so important that it's featured in the logo for the game in tandem with the remains of the damaged Master Sword. Although, there's another potential meaning behind the sword. Rather than a literal interpretation, let's look at a metaphorical one. The shapes used to make up this sword match up with Zonai iconography, making it appear much like the pictures seen on the wall behind the logo and more. So, what if this actually represents the presence of the Master Sword in Zonai history? Or, even further, what if this represents that the Zonai had a hand in everything, and are the backbone to so much of this world? After all, many of the Sheikah shrines in Breath of the Wild were built on Zonai ruins. So, what if this represents the role that the Zonai have played all along in this world, having such a heavy influence that they were even involved in the creation of the Master Sword itself, and are needed to restore it when it's destroyed? We're getting pretty heavily into theories about the Zonai role now, but there's actually even more to support this. The other important piece of the logo is this pair of dragons. They form a circle behind the title, two serpent-like dragons spinning into each other. The design of their faces match up with the dragon statues found across Hyrule in Breath of the Wild, primarily associated with Zonai ruins. the Zonai being an ancient race that had ruins found all over Hyrule, most notably around the Spring of Courage. We've already seen several indications that they'll play a role in this game, between the different structural designs in the sky matching up with their ruins, dragon iconography in various trailers, and more. Featuring these dragons in the logo all but confirm their importance to this title, but surely simply featuring one dragon would get that across. These two dragons form a circle together, making it similar to an Ouroboros. An Ouroboros depicts a serpent or dragon eating its own tail, typically depicting the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. But in this case, it's two dragons eating each other's tails. Well, sort of, because these dragons appear to have their mouths closed, much like the various statues we can find in Breath of the Wild. There are some instances of Ouroboros being depicted by using two dragons or serpents swallowing each other's tails, but the meaning is generally the same: a cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Given that we're dealing with an ancient race in this game, it's not too surprising that such a symbol could appear if they're returning. The cycle that Ouroboros represents is one very similar to the main cast of the Zelda series. Zelda, originally the goddess Hylia reborn as immortal, with her bloodline able to harness the power of the gods, Link, who embodies the reincarnated spirit of the hero, and Ganon, who embodies the hatred of demise reincarnated. It's a constant cycle of life, death, and rebirth across the whole series. Moving on from the title and logo for the game, let's talk about the mysterious opening to the trailer. The ancient markings and designs upon a wall that seem to tell a pretty important story. We're first greeted to a close-up of this strange being. They've got long hair and lots of jewelry or accessories on, in addition to an intricately designed headdress. Or, those are some really big ears and large eyes. The eyes have 3 triangles beneath them, reminiscent of the Sheikah crest, or more specifically in this case, the Yiga clans, since the triangles are beneath the eye rather than above them. From the zoomed out version of the same shot, we can see more of this being. Their hair goes down all the way to their feet, and they're dressed in some sort of intricate ceremonial-like garb. They hold their hands out at their sides, in a ritualistic fashion, while standing on this large platform. It's pretty heavily designed, and the shape of it vaguely reminds me of the top of one of the large buildings we've seen a few times now. It's also clearly high up in the sky, as there's clouds all around them. So this likely ties into the sky islands we've been seeing in the game. But most importantly, there's 7 glowing shapes around this person. They seem similar in shape to the Zonai swirl, but the exact shape of them isn't what's important here. Clearly, these are some sort of gemstones with power that are being used for something. Chaos Emeralds? Okay, since there's 7 of them, it's likely similar to some previous Zelda game, such as the 7 Sages in Ocarina of Time, or 7 Maidens in A Link to the Past. The scene depicted here is sinister and mysterious. If this is some god or deity using this power for good, it doesn't read that way at all. Take the opening to Skyward Sword for instance. The legend of Hylia sending Skyloft into the heavens. It feels more hopeful in its depiction. This just feels unnerving. There's large strokes of light coming down from higher up in the sky. To the left is some sort of column. It looks a bit like the dragon statues found around Hyrule, but it's hard to say for sure what this pillar or statue actually is. There's also some kind of writing to the right of it, and while we can't translate it, it's very familiar. It's actually the same kind of writing as seen in the reveal trailer for this game, from the green energy and hand sealing the corpse. So it proves that whatever created the power that is keeping that corpse at bay is the same as the ones to create these inscriptions and images in stone. The next markings we see depict 2 armies. Soldiers on the left, wielding swords, shields with a crest, and 2 different kinds of looks. One wears more traditional armor with a helmet closely fitted to the head. The other wears what looks more like a dress, and has a ball on the back of the helmet. From the look of their bodies, though they dress differently, they appear to be the same species, and wield the same weapons. Down below, we can see this row of soldiers don't have swords. Instead, they have their shields out, actively defending. More than likely, these are soldiers of Hyrule. We can even see some engaged in combat, or fallen in battle, to the right. Of course, the other big part of this picture is the army of bokoblins and moblins, moving forth in a wave of malice. So, if this was made by the Zonai, it raises a pretty important question. when was this battle? We know from Breath of the Wild that an older version of Link and Zelda battled Calamity Ganon 10,000 years ago using an army of Sheikah technology. But as far as we know, the Zonai weren't around then. Sheikah monks that prepared for the Calamity's return 10,000 years later built their shrines in Zonai ruins, utilizing structures and works of an already ancient race, didn't they? Plus, if Calamity Ganon has been the main threat to Hyrule for the last 10 millennium, this presumed corpse of Ganon has been sealed for longer than that, or at least that long. So what does this battle depict? It clearly can't be anything more recent. The next marking shows us a person floating. It seems to be pretty zoomed in, and doesn't show us the full picture. For example, the previous two pictures look to show at least 8 stone slabs to tell the story, at least from what we can see on screen. But here, we can only see 5, with the edge of a 6th. So we're not seeing everything here, and it's clearly zoomed in to focus on this floating person, so who are they? The way they're floating kind of reminds me of when Girahim had captured Zelda in Skyward Sword. They have long flowing hair, a necklace, belt, and long dress. We can see bracelets on their wrists and anklets as well. There's some sort of circle on their head, and they also have the Sheikah-like eyes I mentioned before. So there's 2 ideas for who this could be. It could be that corpse we saw from previous trailers, implied to be Ganondorf, being stopped. It's vaguely similar with the jewelry and gem on the forehead. The outfit doesn't really match though, as this looks more regal, while the sealed corpse is in far less. However, there's one thing stopping this from being Ganondorf: the ears. We can see pointed ears on this floating person, mixed in with the hair a bit. The corpse, on the other hand, has more human-like ears rather than pointed. So, if not Ganondorf, then that means it must be Zelda, the second option. Well, not the exact Zelda from Breath of the Wild, of course, but an ancestor of hers, an older Zelda, much like the one depicted in the war against Calamity Ganon 10 millennia ago. So, what's happening to Zelda here? Well, she seems to be unconscious with her eye closed, as she's suspended in the air, more specifically over Malice, as we can see at the very bottom here. There's a figure to the right, but it's hard to make out who they are. We can see more patterns similar to Zelda's dress, but they don't match up with the mysterious character either. So whoever this is, they're standing near Zelda and Malice, and may be responsible for Zelda floating here. But we still don't know what's going on. Is she being sacrificed to the Malice? Well, we'll come back to that. For now, let's move on to the next scene. The next scene is once again zoomed in, focusing on Zelda. Her pointed ear is more noticeable this time, and this time she's standing with her eye open. Her clothing matches up with the previous clip, though we don't see as much of it, as we don't see much below her belt, and the necklace isn't in view either. With the top of her dress here, the belt, and more of the dress going down, it actually reminds me more of her white dress from Breath of the Wild. Interestingly, she still has this circle up on her head. Her arm is held out, making half of a circle with her hand. There's another hand joined with her in some sort of ritual. There's a bright shining light above the duo, making multiple rings and casting out rays. To her right, we can see some sort of pillar or statue with writing, much like in an earlier clip, but this time it's facing to the left. So what's going on here? Well, we can actually see more of this scene if we look behind the logo reveal. While it may be difficult to make out behind the game's logo, we can still see Zelda here on the right with her arm outstretched. To the left, we can see the other entity in this ritual is the mysterious person seen in the first clip, thanks to the long hair and ears, or headdress they're wearing. Between the duo are 2 of the 7 glowing gems that we saw before, but now 2 of them are glowing together. So, what is this ritual? Why did this iteration of Zelda perform a ritual with this being eons ago? Well, what if Zelda worked with this other being to seal Ganon away all those years ago? So let's say Ganon invaded Hyrule, spreading malice and monsters through the land. It was hopeless, there was no end in sight. Zelda's powers and the gods weren't enough to stop Ganon, so she teams up with this other being from the Zonai. Together they use their powers, with some sort of conduits or special items, to seal Ganon away, leading to him being trapped in the way he's found in the first trailer to the game. But he's not completely sealed, with malice leaking out over time, which led to Calamity Ganon many years later, initially in the war 10,000 years ago, and then more recently in Breath of the Wild. Now, this doesn't sound unreasonable, except for this scene with Zelda. What's going on here? Is she being betrayed by the Zonai? Or is she being rescued by them? If we work off of the order of events shown here in the trailer, we see a war, the Zonai, Zelda above the malice, then the ritual together. So what if Zelda was actually rescued or even revived from the war? So then what if this ritual being performed by the Zonai isn't anything sinister, but a revival ritual to bring Zelda back? Something the Sheikah later adapted into their own technology to create the Shrine of Resurrection. The figure depicting Zelda does have this circular shape on her head, and so does the Ganon corpse. Why do I keep bringing up this gem on her head, you may ask? Well, it just strikes me as odd. Ganondorf's corpse has the same thing on him, only it's not just a random jewel or gem like he's worn before. The yellow glow of it stands out like it's important, and even though it's been over 3 years since the original trailer, I've only just now realized that there's something special about this gem. There's some sort of energy current swirling around inside of it. It's not the green energy related to life and Zonai, nor the red energy related to malice. So what is it? Well, gold or yellow is often energy and power tied to light and the gods. It may even be similar to the golden light we see Link stand in front of. If he's doing that to restore the Master Sword, it must be some sort of power of the gods, or life. Perhaps this is why when the seal is broken on Ganon's corpse, he begins to wake up, his life force or power stored inside the gem. Which brings us back to Zelda, and these pictures depicting her with a similar circular gem on her head. Perhaps this is tied to her being resurrected by the Zonai or the gods, and that's why she wears this on her head? And perhaps the same goes for Ganondorf? Of course, this then begs the question why the Zonai would revive both Zelda and Ganondorf. So, in all honesty, maybe this just depicts some sort of circlet one on her head, and is nothing more than decoration. But I at least wanted to remind everyone of the importance of the yellow energy we've seen with both Link and Ganondorf now, and how it could tie back to Zelda. Now, there's one more theory that comes from these stone pictures. We may be able to piece together the order they happen in, and it may not be the order they were shown to us in. See this pillar and writing next to Zelda? Well, I mentioned it's very similar to what we saw with the Zonai being using their power. So, working off of these and the malice, I think we can put them together in order, though of course we may be missing some of the story in the middle. So Ganon's army attacks Hyrule. Zelda is rescued or revived from the war, indicated by the malice, connecting it somewhere up here. After being rescued, Zelda works together with this being to perform some sort of ritual involving these gemstones. Perhaps it involves Zelda using her sacred powers on them. But then, the strange being is left alone with the 7 glowing gems, in a sinister looking picture. It's tough with two theories like this, as one paints this Zonai as good intentioned, and the other as evil. Without having the full story of what's going on, it's tough to say for sure which it could really be, but either way, it's clearly very important. The 7 gems, or 9 if we count the 2 in the ritual with Zelda, just in case they aren't part of the 7 from the other clip, are clearly very important. And hey, they may even be the Tears of the Kingdom, the title to the game. After all, Zelda as a series is no stranger to collecting tear-like objects. Sacred Tears in Skyward Sword, Tears of Light in Twilight Princess, etc. These may be this game's equivalent to, say, the Sage Medallions in Ocarina of Time, the main collectible that Link needs to achieve his mission. Maybe that's what he encounters in the short clip, holding the Master Sword out. There were Zonai markings on the ground here as well, so whatever it was, it's tied to them. Of course, if these gemstones are what Link is collecting, they may not literally be called the Tears of the Kingdom, but who knows there. Okay, we've talked a lot about the title and logo to the game, and even more about the ancient stone artwork from the beginning of this trailer. We're this far in, and we haven't even started talking about the gameplay yet. So I think it's finally time we head over to Link, and look at what this world and gameplay has to offer. So our first gameplay clip shows Link pushing open a pair of huge white doors. There's 2 Zonai dragons here. It's similar to the shape they make in the logo for the game, but they aren't eating each other's tails. Instead, their faces meet in the middle up top. Down their bodies are inscriptions, seemingly saying the same thing on both sides. We can match up some symbols in the same placement on both sides, but interestingly, they're mirrored. It's an interesting way to depict a written language. There's also various swirl designs along the top of both doors. What's more interesting is down by Link, the handles. They stand out significantly from the rest of the door, with an intricate metallic design around them. When the door is closed, they make the shape of an eye. Once the doors are opened, we can get a closer look at each half of the eye, especially in the screenshot. It bears a resemblance to the Sheikah eye, as well as the pointed eyes seen in the stone pictures earlier in the trailer. Combine this with the eye symbol on Link's new shield we've been seeing in a few trailers now, clearly eyes are just as important to Zelda as ever. Looking past the eyes, there's something really interesting about Link opening these doors. It almost seems like a cutscene at first, with the movement of the camera and amount of force going into opening the doors. But once they're open and Link starts moving, it no longer feels like a cutscene. Link starts sprinting forward, and though we can't see a stamina wheel due to all UI seemingly being disabled, we can see the sweat drops that appear when Link uses his stamina. We don't usually see these in cutscenes, meaning this door opening animation is just really fine-tuned. Anyway, once the door is opened, we're greeted to a bright sky, revealing this to be on a sky island. It's worth pointing out, this trailer features our first look at Link in his traditional Breath of the Wild outfit while up in the Sky Islands. Up to this point, we had only seen him in the ancient-looking clothes while in the sky, and these Hylian clothes when down in Hyrule. So it's good to see that customization is indeed back, as we've suspected all along. Anyway, Link sprints out down the path. It goes out to a platform leading to another island with some sort of floating altar, featuring more of those triangular pillars. A screenshot shows us that the platform just up these steps has two dragon statue heads on the sides, showing yet another instance of such iconography here in the sky. These Zonai really like dragons. Anyway, the next clip shows Link running towards the camera, as it pans around him before he dives off the side of one of these floating islands. But let's back up a bit here. We can't see much behind Link, other than more of this bright yellow grass and some bushes. Much of the area behind Link is obscured by clouds. We can see some trees off to the right and left, so presumably there's something back there, or those are part of some other islands floating closely nearby. To the left is a large ruined stone structure, and as the clip continues, we can see some sort of smaller structure up on top. It's hard to say exactly what either of these are, but they appear to be part of something bigger, attached to a cliffside. There's some dead trees off to the left in the shadows, and the grass looks more white here, like snow. Shifting focus back to Link, there's a few things to talk about here. First up, his right hand. Yeah, it's still damaged and in the brace, looking very different from his left hand. It still has that dead dark green color, with the long nails. We've seen him in this pretty much every trailer now, but this gives us a pretty good close-up look at it while he's in his Hylian clothes and in the sky. So in case there was, for some reason, still debate about if there were two different Links and only the one in ancient clothes had the messed up arm, no, this is still our Link. We've still only seen one Link. Anyway, there's more than just his hand to talk about here. He's got something new attached to his hip, perhaps replacing the Sheikah slate this time around. Some bright glowing objects and containers, likely holding something pretty important. So, what is this? Well, if we get really close to get a better look, there's 8 slots in total, with 4 of them filled. They kind of look like small batteries. Meanwhile, the empty slots have these prongs sticking out, likely to hold the filled containers. The main portion to this is shaped a bit like a key. The very top of it that hooks on a Link's belt is shaped like an eye, with the iris inside glowing just like the containers. It takes the same shape as the other Zonai eyes, with the dark green stone that we've seen before, such as with the strange robotic-like creature in the previous trailer. But the visuals of it aside, what could it be used for? It's likely some sort of key item if it's displayed on Link like this. And I'm sure over time, it could either be more empty or more filled, rather than staying half and half like this. It reminds me of the sacred tears that went into the spirit vessel in Skyward Sword. So could it be related to the 7 gems we see inscribed on the wall? Well, there's 8 slots on this item, but 7 gems, so probably not. So instead of being tied to the tears, what if it's tied to a new mechanic? It glows the same energy as Link's new ability to move through objects like we saw in the previous trailer. Maybe it's related to abilities like that, and therefore represents how many times Link can use such abilities before needing to recharge these batteries. There's another important point of this item at Link's hip though. We haven't seen it before, at all. We've seen Link up close in several different clips and trailers before, with his left hip visible, and not once have we seen this key item before. So when does he get it? Is it just not always visible? We also don't see it on his hip in a later clip of this trailer when he's climbing in the ancient robes. So whatever it is, and whenever Link gets it, it's clearly important if it's featured so prominently like the Sheikah Slate was. Anyway, continuing on with this clip of Link running. As the camera pans around, we can see more floating islands and cliffsides near Link. There's some more dead trees on what looks like a snowy island. Some more islands can be seen above Link up ahead, with green points at the bottoms, likely tied to the core of the islands themselves, however they're made to fly up here in the sky. All of the islands up ahead have the same yellow trees and orange grass. Of course, there's quite a few points of interest here with this view. First up, the obvious one, this huge building up ahead. We saw what seems to be the same building from a different perspective at night in an earlier trailer. This time it seems like we're facing it dead on, meaning the previous view of it was somewhere over here. Taking a closer look at it, we can see that the building looks old, with some plants growing on the exterior and some cracks visible near the bottom. There's some sort of small glowing light in the tree branch sticking out of the wall here. It could be part of the blue skies behind, but it'd be a strange hole in the cloud. The top of the building curves outward, with a fence-like wall along the top edges on the sides. It's clear that this building is important, but it's hard to say what it could be. A temple, perhaps? As we mentioned earlier, at the top of this building vaguely resembles the floating platform that Zonai stands on in the still pictures, but not enough to confidently pin this building as that location. The next point of interest is here off to the left. There's some sort of cable, possibly connecting two islands together. Being the only cable we can see here like this, it begs the question of if it has some sort of purpose. Are we able to grind down it like in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 or a Sonic game? More importantly though is the last point of interest here. Just above the cable is a dragon. We can see its tail sticking out on the left here, and some more of its body through the trees. It's mostly obscured by the island and the clouds, but it's definitely a long dragon like we saw in Breath of the Wild. Perhaps this is where they would go right after flying through the cloudy portal in the sky. So then, which dragon is it? It seems to be white and blue, with the scales on its back lighting up. The thing is, from what we can see of it, it doesn't really match up with the color scheme or tail design of any of the dragons in Breath of the Wild. So, if it isn't Naedra, Farosh, or Dinral, does this mean there are other dragons to be found in the sky too? It's possible, since the tail looks different from the three Sacred Dragons, but if Bokoblins and Moblins can get slight redesigns for this sequel, it's possible the dragons could get similar treatment. So, therefore, it's not impossible that this is still one of them. Anyway, as Link dives off the island, he holds a diving pose before changing to one more spread out to slow his fall. This lines up with the patterns we saw, demonstrating Link changing his position and angle in the sky. Sadly, we don't see him do it with arrows at the ready, but it'll be exciting when we can finally see that in action. Anyway, as Link falls through the clouds, we can see the lowest point of an island visible just nearby, being another point. It's pretty hard to make out more of the surface below Link though, so we can't really identify where he is. There may be another floating island nearby, and some sort of structure down here, but otherwise, it's a bunch of mountains and cliffs, and not any that we can easily identify. So, let's move on to the next gameplay clip, showcasing Link grabbing onto a stasis object and rising into the sky. There's a lot to take in here. Firstly, this is similar to the Stasis Clip from a previous trailer, where Link sends the rolling spike ball back up the hill. This explains why pretty much everything is in grayscale. In this case, he uses it on this piece of rubble, and it rises back up into the sky. This is big, as it implies this large piece of rubble came from a sky island at some point, possibly recently, and Link can reverse its motions to give him a ride all the way back up to a sky island. The rubble itself has markings all over it, which appear broken or faded. So this raises a question. Since we've already seen other kinds of rubble or changes to Hyrule, likely caused by the appearances of the Sky Islands, can we reverse their falls and send them back up, and hitch a ride as a means to traverse back up to the sky? It seems to go pretty far up as we can see. There's a variety of sky islands, and tons of clouds, some of which on the left are more ominously obscuring islands, with lightning moving within the clouds. Traveling into the sky aside, there's more to take away from this clip, as we can actually pinpoint exactly where it takes place. It's in Korta Lake, near Mount Floria, in the Faron region. In Breath of the Wild, there's a rock here between these structures, rather than this piece of rubble. But there's a bigger difference between these two clips. In Tears of the Kingdom, there's a whole cave back here against the cliffside, that definitely wasn't here before. We can see the shape of the opening and some of the structural interior as well. There's some plants growing on the floor and ceiling. So this tells us that the surface world won't be one-to-one with its appearance in Breath of the Wild. Beyond some obvious changes, like Hyrule Castle being lifted into the air and new rubble from the sky appearing, it seems safe to say caves and more can be found around now too. It's a shame that we don't get to see what's inside this cave though. There's one last point of interest with this Stasis Clip, and it's this brand new enemy up here. It looks like a small dragon or wyvern-like creature. It doesn't resemble the keys from Breath of the Wild, though it does remind me of how they look in Twilight Princess. So could this be a redesigned Keese? Or a brand new enemy? It has bat-like wings, and more as part of its long tail. It also seems to have some sort of horn on its head, much like the redesigned Bokoblins and Moblins. Moving on, the next clip shows Link in these ancient robes again, climbing up the side of an island. This looks like it'd be a lot to climb, so I wonder what his stamina is. Since there's no UI shown in these gameplay clips, unfortunately, we're gonna have to wait for that answer. He has a stone axe strapped to his back, looking notably different from the axes in Breath of the Wild. The head of the axe looks like it's carved from stone, while the handle looks like stripped wood, or even bone. Shifting focus back to the environment, Link is climbing a tree root sticking out of the side of the island. There's a bunch of marks all over the rock, but rather than wear from age, it's actually due to the cold. Looking closely, we can see that it seems to be snowing. How is Link not freezing in that outfit? Beyond the weather, there's more yellow trees and bushes down below at a different island, somewhat down below Link. So this isn't the lowest point that Link could be at. There's clouds below, which may be obscuring more islands. On the right is some water coming out of a hole in the rocks, pouring down below. Will it actually end up somewhere on another island? Or even down to the surface? Unfortunately, there's not much else to say about this clip, so let's move on. Link falls to the sky with a beautiful view of Hyrule, before changing his position and landing on some sort of bird-like object in the sky. But let's focus on the first part of this clip first, because there is a lot to take in here. We can see some more sky islands nearby, and as the camera starts to turn, so many more come into view. Hyrule Castle can be seen and is still lifted up by Malice as seen in the previous trailer, but it seems it stays at this height, and doesn't really move up much higher. There's 3 small things above the castle. It could be flags? Or perhaps far-off sky islands. Death Mountain is also visible in the distance, and it too has Malice pouring out from it. So Malice will be coming out of more than just beneath Hyrule Castle. Could this indicate a reason to revisit the core locations from Breath of the Wild? Maybe we meet up with the champion descendants once again, in their respective regions, to stop the flow of Malice. We haven't seen Malice spewing out of any other locations yet, but it's unlikely that these are the only 2 in all of Hyrule. Interestingly though, looking back in the E3 2021 trailer, Death Mountain was calm. We saw it in the background in another clip, and not only did it not have any lava or fire, but it definitely didn't have any Malice either. Perhaps the area had already been completed at that point, but if Link was that far into the adventure, why didn't he have the key item attached to his left hip? Beyond these strange inconsistencies with Death Mountain, we can spot several other changes across Hyrule. As we mentioned in previous videos, there's no sign of shrines, Sheikah Towers, or divine beasts. This body of water in the background is where the Ridgeland Tower should be. It's perfectly in view, so we can confidently say Sheikah Towers are gone. Hopefully the game answers where they went. In the ending of Breath of the Wild, Zelda mentioned that Divine Beast Varuta has stopped working, and they were going to set out to investigate why. Perhaps in the time between then and the start of this game, all of the Sheikah technology has returned to slumber, getting sealed away once again. Aside from the Sheikah Towers, there's some different tower worth mentioning, here on the far left. On the map, this would be Linder's Brow. Previously, this cliff was relatively flat with grass, but now there's a tower here. It doesn't seem to be glowing at all, so perhaps it was just built in the time since the previous adventure. It vaguely reminds me of the Akala and Hateno ancient tech labs, but this is much taller and thinner. It also looks like it's over some sort of hole or body of water, but there was no such water before. The existence of new caves proves that the geography has changed a bit since the last game, perhaps from earthquakes caused by Hyrule Castle being pushed into the air by Malice. So we may be able to expect more changes like this as we go. Pushing just ahead in this clip a bit to after Link lands on the bird-like object and the camera tilts downwards, we can see that he's near the Tabantha Great Bridge, placing him about here on the map. Just below, we can see the Tabantha Bridge Stable, which confirms the stables are indeed back. Being a sequel to Breath of the Wild, it's safe to assume that many of its features are likely returning. Seeing a stable here, in the same place as before at that, likely means its features are back too. Resting, cooking food at the fire, registering horses, etc. Which would also mean that riding horses is back too. Though, that shouldn't be that surprising. Interestingly, we may be able to see another stable. Looking past where Ridgeland Tower should be, near the glowing symbols we'll come back to later, we can see what looks to be another stable. It has that distinct horse head-like look to it. But there was never a stable in North Hyrule Plains before, so are new stables being added then? There's a couple of other points of interest here by the Tabantha Bridge stable. Firstly is just down here, on the cliffs across from it. There's some sort of egg-shaped device that's sending out glowing green rings. While it's hard to see as the logo begins to come in, it looks more like a swirl of green energy. Quite possibly the same kind that's flowing through the stone creature seen in the E3 2021 trailer, or the same kind that allows Link to phase through objects. It also looks close to the energy keeping the corpse sealed in the first trailer, with the swirl and all, but that energy was coming from the hand holding the corpse, whereas here it's just coming off of a rock. And interestingly enough, this isn't even the only one we can see here. Looking ahead of Link into the distance, we can see another one pretty far off by Lake Illumini. So what's the deal with these stone eggs and the energy flowing out of them? It's clearly of importance to Link's adventure, but what are they doing here in Hyrule? Well, remember how I just mentioned it seems similar to Link rising and phasing through objects? As it turns out, that clip from the previous trailer was also right above the Hyrule Ridge. This rock scene up ahead in that clip is the same one we see covered in markings in the latest trailer, meaning the stable would be a bit to the right of that. But, of course, the positions of the glowing objects don't exactly line up, as Link would be at the opposite end of Hyrule Ridge. But what if these were travel points up to the sky? Well, it would offer a different method of transportation upwards, beyond Link hitching a ride on a stasis piece of rubble at least. It could also serve as a fast travel point, since the first one we saw is so close to the stable. And if we can see two within relatively close proximity to each other, it's possible they're scattered all around, like shrines were in Breath of the Wild. There's also some sort of large dark cube on the cliffs behind the stable. It seems to have a single hole in the top, but it's hard to make out more details. Could it be a house with windows and a chimney? Well, it wasn't there in Breath of the Wild, so maybe it's another piece of debris fallen down from the Sky Islands. It's about as mysterious to me as the large tower on Linder's Brow. Of course, we can't leave out these strange glowing pictures. The first one is on the ground just past where the Ridgeland Tower should be. Going off of the maps, this should be North Hyrule Plains. This glowing symbol is rather large, spread out along the field. It's further away and hard to make out exactly what it is, but we can make out a sort of swirl on the right, and what may be a hand pointing towards Hyrule Castle. The left side seems to be cut off by the hills though, so we can't see the full image. The second one is far more obvious, located ahead of Link after he lands on the stone bird. This one is also fairly big, and more closely resembles the pictures from the stone slabs in the beginning of the trailer in terms of visual style. If we spin this image around, we can see that it's actually a person. But the question is, who? It's not Zelda or the mysterious Zonai person we saw. The designs don't match up at all with them, so this is someone else entirely. Could it be tied to a sage, or another important character, if there are indeed more to be found that tie into the mysterious power of the tears? Whoever it is, they don't have the Hylian ears. They're clearly someone of importance. Could this first image in North Hyrule Plains also be of a person? There's a similar swirl on the right, so perhaps it depicts the same person, but in a different pose? We can go on forever with these theories about the Zonai pictures again, so let's shift focus down to another piece of Zonai technology here, this bird. Link lands on it before immediately crouching down. The main body is a sort of faded dark green color, the same color as Link's new key item and the strange stone robot from the last trailer. So it's a color we're quickly beginning to recognize with the Zonai. The thin silvery wings are bent at the far edges. There's orange markings all over as well, including stripes along the top parts of the wings, a slab on the back of the main body, the central circle here in the middle, and what appears to be an eye at the front. The orange slab in the back is accompanied by some sort of inscription or marking along the dark black indentation. But I find the circle in the middle most interesting. It reminds me of the middle of Link's right hand now. So what's the purpose? Well, maybe it's where Link must stand in order to control the bird? Perhaps the bird serves as a way for Link to travel in the air without needing to glide or use stamina. We can see that this bird is indeed gliding, not simply floating in place. However, after Link lands on it, it angles down. It's a bit hard to tell with the camera movements, but we can just barely make out the motion lines through the air that appear from the edges of the wings. These only fade in after Link has landed on the bird and crouched, so it seems like this bird is flying down towards the glowing symbols ahead of it. But why? Is Link controlling it to do so? Or would the bird always angle down after Link lands on it? Alternatively, does this bird fly a set path from different glowing markings? There's something else big that we can learn from this clip of Hyrule. It may give us a sense of scale of this adventure. So we know that Link is near the Tabantha frontier, with the camera facing towards Hyrule Castle and Death Mountain at first. Notably, we can see the outer border of Hyrule along the left, the continent that acts as a barrier of the open world in Breath of the Wild. The thing is, there are barely any sky islands in view to the left at all. But as the camera turns right, towards the rest of Hyrule, tons more come into view. This may imply that the borders of Hyrule and the open world of this game should be about the same as before, just, a lot more vertical than before with the whole Sky Islands. But the entire world size in terms of representing it on a map should be about the same, fitting within the world of Breath of the Wild, but adding more up in the sky and underground with caves. Anyway, let's take a look at the huge number of Sky Islands over Hyrule. While there's a large variety in general, there's one big group that's substantially larger. Consider the fact that it's clearly further away, right? So it already looks smaller than it actually is. But compare the size of it to Hyrule Castle down here, or even Death Mountain. This island, or series of islands, is huge, and it may even be as large as an entire region in Hyrule. We know there's a high density of Sky Islands in general, but this one in particular seems important, at least out of all the ones we can actively see on screen right now, which, by the way, is about 50. The exact number is hard to pinpoint when so many are grouped together, and some may simply be smaller rocks floating near an island, like this one by Link. Speaking of this island by Link, we can see that it has some triangular pillars, a couple of trees, some ruins, and some sort of statue on the right. It looks to have a circular pattern or section right in front of it, so it may be something that Link can interact with. Maybe it's a stone tablet to stand in front of and read. At the very start of this clip, there's another set of islands above Link, but these ones are different. The bottom of this island looks more mechanical, or man-made. It looks more interconnected than other Sky Islands. It's odd, and it makes it stand out. We've seen the green points at the bottom of islands before, but this one looks like something else entirely. The same can be said of that huge island off in the distance we mentioned earlier. The leftmost portion of it looks very interconnected, like it doesn't match up with the rest of the island. Okay, one last thing about this clip. One other island in particular strikes me as odd. In the distance, we can see the lower point of an island much more clearly than the rest of it. But why? It looks like it's poking out through clouds, but the skies are relatively clear, with the only actual clouds in sight being off to the right. Even looking out towards that island, the skies look clear, and the dark silhouette of another island nearby stands out totally fine. But what's with the cloudy look to the rest of this and some other islands here? Is it a rendering issue or something? Well, I think it may actually be the cloud barrier from Skyward Sword, or the cloud portal that the sacred dragons open up when they fly away in Breath of the Wild. Magical clouds in the sky that hide what's above them, being practically invisible from the surface. Alright, we're almost done here, but there's one last thing I'd like to talk about here. We already discussed tons of findings in the trailer and screenshots, various theories about the stone pictures, and plenty more. But we've yet to take a look at the official artwork for the game that was released, which is also used for the box art. It features Link standing up on a sky island, with the yellow grass we've already seen before. He has the key item at his hip, notably still with only 4 slots filled up. At the cliffs in front of him, the rocks have some strange patterns on them. Patterns we've actually seen before, during the Stasis section of this trailer. This confirms that parts of the islands are crumbling down to Hyrule, and Link can send them back up to the sky to hitch a ride himself. That piece of rubble must have come from an edge of a path like this one. There's tons of other islands shown off in this artwork, of varying sizes, but one in particular catches my interest. In the upper left, we can see some sort of tower or a temple. It even has an open doorway. It doesn't quite look like the tall tower we've seen in several trailers now, so it may be something else entirely. But the structures to the side of this island make it feel like you're supposed to climb up it, so it definitely seems important. Finally, let's look down to Hyrule. We can see Death Mountain and Hyrule Castle both struggling with malice as we mentioned before, but there's something else interesting further to Hyrule south. It looks like a giant twister or tornado, some sort of windstorm that's causing trouble, going all the way up to the Sky Islands. Well, if we're looking at Death Mountain here, with Hyrule Castle in view, then that diagonal view should place that tornado most likely down in the Gerudo Desert. Yeah, that sounds bad. And, like another key area from Breath of the Wild, that has a solid reason to revisit it too. I wonder what the Rito and Zora may be facing, or if there's anything happening down in the Faron or Necluda regions. And with that is everything we can find and theorize about from the latest trailer for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Now that we finally know the name and a release date for this game, the wait for this enormous title feels more bearable. Between the truth of the story told on the stone slabs, Link's new key item, changes to Hyrule itself, and even the intricate logo to this game, it's clear that Tears of the Kingdom is about to be a massive Zelda title. One that I am so excited for. This was an incredibly lengthy analysis, but I thank you all for watching. If you found something that we might have missed, or you have any theories about the game yourself, please share your thoughts down below. Stay tuned to GameXplain for plenty more on The Legend of Zelda and other things gaming as well. Until next time, farewell everyone.